Hello! Welcome to Pull to Open, an ongoing quest to watch all of Doctor Who in random order. I'm Chris Taylor.
And I'm Pete Pachal. We're journalists who've written extensively about Doctor Who, fans from childhood, and we love to nerd out about this show. We just love it.
Yeah, absolutely. In common with a lot of people, I think.
I've got actually a lot of experience nerding out about this show with various people.
I feel like I've done more nerding out about the show than I have watching the show.
I think
which is sort of...
if you look at the time we've been colleagues, the time we spent nerding out about Doctor Who versus talking about work, probably greater than actually talking about work.
Well, let me tell you, I'm super excited to nerd out about this week's show that we watched,
I as well.
Inferno, because it is. I've been sort of a fan of Doctor Who since the late 70s, since childhood.
Impressive.
And I had never seen this before.
Wow.
And
okay.
I'm kind of mad that I hadn't. I'm kind of mad that the BBC didn't show it again. Like, you know, the BBC didn't like re-show a lot of Pertwee episodes in my childhood, but they really should have shown this, because this was... I think I would have dug this as a kid.
Well, I did dig it as a kid. As I revealed at the last pod, that I started with Peter Davison, but at the end of Davison's run, at the end of Caves of Androzani on my local PBS channel, the dailies switched to John Pertwee. And so this was early on in my run of Doctor Who, and I tell you, I was really riveted. And I was also what was also new in our household at the time was a VCR.
Oh.
And so I've actually seen this one a number of times, although I don't think I've seen it in about 30 years, maybe a little less. Like, it's been a long time since the last time I watched it. But I remember really digging it. I remember some of the feelings I had. But I got to say, revisiting it, I was a little wary that, is it gonna not age well? Is it gonna seem cheesy? And I was very happy to report, like, it's wow, it holds up. I was really, really into it.
Yeah, spoiler alert, we both loved it.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about the podcast. You've been doing some TikToks.
Oh, yes.
This week.
Yeah.
And we went viral again.
Yeah, we had a great one. So, yeah, just so everyone knows, we are a podcast. In case you're encountering this somewhere else on the internet.
In case you thought you were just hearing voices in your head.
So please subscribe if you haven't already. But we have a nice TikTok feed. It is Pull to Open, just straight up on TikTok, where we take little excerpts from the show and put some of the footage over it, and try to get some sort of the better commentary and give it some visual aids. And it's super fun. We did a bunch from the last podcast, which was Pyramids of Mars, and one of them was clearly spoke to the audience, and I think it was very clear why. It was the 1980 moment in Pyramids of Mars, which we don't have to recap exactly, but it's very much like an iconic moment in the series, and I think people really dug that it was there and was just sort of helped them relive that moment. Because I think, like we said, you could see why that was a serious moment for the series, and sort of showing that, and it was.
Yeah, I think what this tells us is that Doctor Who fans love to talk about chronology, the chronology of the show, the chronology within the show, and it kind of reminds me of the London 1965 moment that went viral when people were watching the Houghton episodes on Twitch.
Yeah. That was a good time.
London 1980. So yeah, any chance that we have to talk about the year that it takes place in, that's obviously what Doctor Who fans want.
Yeah, absolutely. So follow us there on TikTok. We're also on Instagram, Pull to Open 63, Pultagram.
Pultagram. I love it.
Pultagram, man. That's our the podcast about the podcast, with all the photography from behind the scenes of us in our basements and microphones.
We're doing it for the Pultagram.
You betcha.
Yeah. All right.
Cool.
So let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we need
Inferno.
to save a little time on the recap. We're going to do again the timed recap, the timed and relative dimensioned in space recap, perhaps.
Yep.
So I did
Yep.
it last time. I did it last time for Pyramids of Mars. So you have the privilege of doing it now for Inferno. And we've decided 30 seconds per episode, because this is like a 7-parter. This is actually the longest, the last really long Doctor Who episode of the classic series. It's the last one with 7 or more episodes. It's got 7, which apparently the production team at the time didn't like. They kind of inherited, for whatever reason, the super long episodes. They didn't do them again after this season.
Yeah, the BBC said 7 episodes. The Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks hated the 7-episode structure, but they did it anyway. And as we'll get to, it kind of, having that structure imposed on them kind of birthed some of the best aspects of their show, and perhaps some of the worst aspects of this otherwise very strong story.
It might.
But we'll get to that. And
it might be the only 7-episode story that doesn't feel like 7 episodes, or even more.
But certainly, it doesn't feel like 7 episodes. It's, when you're rewatching it, it's like, and rewatch on BritBox. Thank you, BritBox. Please sponsor us. And, it's only 22 minutes per episode, right? So that's not that long. You stick it together. It's kind of like watching a few episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something.
Yeah. The modern binge watching.
It's not so bad. Yeah, so if this is the longest that it gets, and it's not, whenever we get to War Games, that'll be the longest. But it's nice to have kind of broken the seal on 7 episodes. But let's set the scene. Okay. It's Pertwee's first season. Mm-hmm. It's the 4th story out of 4 for Pertwee's first season. Right. Which I'm always sort of amazed that it's that short. It could have been... I love this sort of, alternate universe, since we're going to be talking about alternate universes. It could have been the last ever Doctor Who story.
That's true. I guess the ratings weren't super great.
If the viewing figures...
Before...
Yeah, the ratings were not great in Troughton's last season, and they had to completely reinvent the show with even less budget, but in colour, with Pertwee, with action Doctor Who. Pertwee was known as a comic actor in the UK, and he really wanted to sort of play against type. And be more of an action hero and do all of his stunts and his driving and so forth. And we see a lot of that here. But yeah, without further ado, let us get into what might have been the last episode ever, the last story ever.
All right.
Of Doctor Who. So are you ready with the timer?
I'm ready with 3 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock, representing 7 episodes at 30 minutes each. We will.
And I've not prepared anything. I just want to say I'm not reading from a script. I'm doing this live from my own recollection of just watching Inferno. So if you've not seen it and you want the TLDW, which is still what I think we should call this segment, I'm ready to go. All right.
TLDW for Inferno. Ready, set, and go.
Okay, so there's this guy called Professor Stallman. He's kind of an asshole, but he's also a super genius, and he's drilling below the Earth's... He's drilling into the Earth's crust and wants to drill below the Earth's crust because there's something called Stallman's gas down there that's going to solve the energy crisis that hasn't happened yet because it's 1970. But it's going to pre-solve the energy crisis. And Eunice has shown up to, I guess, provide security for the project. And the Doctor is there because Unit... And he also wants to use the nuclear power that is right next to this project that's powering the drill or whatever to power the TARDIS so that he can restart the TARDIS because the Time Lords have stranded him on Earth and he's been, I guess, trying to restart the TARDIS all season. So he's taken the console out and stuck it in his hut and he's using nuclear power to try and fire it up so that he can, move it in time and space again. But instead, the Doctor goes to a parallel world where the drilling is slightly more advanced, and Britain is fascist, and Stallman's even more of an asshole. And as he sees in both worlds, the gas or the green ooze is turning people on the project into primords, which are these sort of primitive ape-like creatures with hairy hands and green skin. And the Doctor sees the world explode in this other reality. Basically, he's, the other world, the fascist Britain, is too far gone on the drilling, and all his friends are there. The Brigadier, Liz Shaw, but they're evil in this alternate universe. And the Doctor manages to escape. He can't escape with them, but he escapes just as the world is ending. Returns to the reality that we know, and finds out that gosh, I've got so much time. Finds out that time can be changed in our reality, and some of the things that he's seen happen in this other world where the drilling, goes through the crust and the world basically explodes in earthquakes and volcanoes. And he can stop that happen. He stops it happening, and then right at the end, he tries to use the nuclear power one more time to power the TARDIS and to get away from the Brigadier, who he decides that he hates, but it actually only sends him to the rubbish heap next to the project, and he comes back with his tail between his legs, and the further adventures of the Doctor and unit continue. And there's a subplot with a drilling expert who's sort of falls in love with the woman named Petra on the project, who's sort of Stallman's right-hand woman, and they go off together. And yeah, that's about
20
it.
seconds. You want to
20 seconds.
throw in anything else?
And then we also have a government minister who's overseeing the project and constantly is trying to shut Stallman down, but Stallman shuts him down, and he forestalls any kind of interference, and he's sort of a contender for biggest asshole in Doctor Who. How did I do? Do you think I left anything major out there?
No, you did great, and like you say, it just shows how straightforward this story is, and that they don't overcomplicate it, but they sort of milk all those story beats to maximum effect. I think you did at one point say when you talked about him going off you said TARDIS and not just the TARDIS console, but I think you might have clarified that later with sort of like what is going on with the Doctor's exile on Earth. But otherwise, no, great stuff. And you once you had extra time, you threw in the stuff with Sutton and everyone else. So 3 minutes 30 seconds, a little long for this one. You could do it in two.
Yeah. I'm ready. I'm ready for those shorter recaps. I think I can do it. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the TARDIS. We might as well get into that part because the Doctor does actually call it the TARDIS.
Right.
And it's kind of weird. The first thing I was going to ask you, as our resident continuity nerd, and certainly you're more of a continuity nerd on the Pertwee era than I am. This is a very unfamiliar territory for me. Is there's no setup for this, right? We never see the Doctor disassembling the TARDIS, taking the console out. No. It's just there.
It's just there, and it's really weird. And honestly, I wasn't really a veteran of Doctor Who at the time, so I wasn't sure. Does he just do that? No, he actually doesn't do that, and he's never done it before or since in terms of removing the console from the TARDIS. So, if as a longtime Who person, I could definitely say what? And it brings up all sorts of questions. And
it really does. How did he get it out?
That's the first one. I know that the TARDIS is dimensionally transcendental, but it's like the doorway is a physical size, and he must have taken it out in parts or did some magic expansion, or did he transport it out of he dematerialized the console from within the TARDIS and then have it materialize outside the TARDIS. So many questions about that.
If this was the modern era, you would definitely have a scene where some burly chaps are sort of taking it out the front door of the TARDIS.
Right.
We don't even see the front door.
Right.
We don't even see the TARDIS box itself.
Right.
I think according to the novelization, it's back at Unit HQ, and he's just, I guess, transported the console on the back of a flatbed truck.
I guess
so it doesn't fit in Bessie either.
Yeah, and it just sort of is there. You kind of have to wonder, the power involved in doing anything with the TARDIS. I guess nuclear power. I mean, I guess he siphons a bit of it from the from the power plant there, but you kind of have to wonder, like, well, wait a minute, like, like as they didn't have this earlier on, but the TARDIS's power source is very mysterious. But later on, they established things like black holes and the Eye of Harmony. Like, obviously, these incredible energies you would need to casually penetrate, time as a thing to travel. And they're kind of absent, clearly here. And so you kind of wonder, like, well, how did that even work? And obviously they haven't. There's a lot of things about this episode, including this, that are never really addressed later. And it's so weird. At the end, he like goes off on his own. He's like, I'm going to leave. Well, you're going to pick up the police box? I mean, like, he just like he's going to go adventuring now just with the console, I guess. I don't know. It's never really clear. Obviously, it doesn't happen. But
hey, if Clara can just go adventuring in a diner, I'm sure the Doctor can just show up in a console, and maybe he can disguise it as a chair or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so
it has its own chameleon circuitry.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But
the other thing,
he does refer to it as the TARDIS, which is weird. Within Inferno, he refers to the console as the TARDIS, which is not just BBC budget cuts. Like, he really thinks that this is the TARDIS itself.
Yeah, which is really good.
Weird.
Like that's clearly the heart of the TARDIS somehow. Like the console, like it's the CPU of the whole thing. Once you remove the console, that the rest is just a vehicle, I guess. That's the strong implication, which that might be contradicted somewhat by other things later in the series, but that's clearly what he's trying to say here.
Yeah, as a fan of the new show, and particularly of the Doctor's wife, I got to wonder, is the spirit of the TARDIS Idris? Is she there in the console? Is that really what's happening here? Maybe headcanon is if he takes off with the console by itself, she becomes human a lot earlier, and they run off together, the Doctor and his wife.
I'd have to think, yes. Well, that's an interesting spin-off series you could think about in like, speaking of parallel worlds. That would be a fun one. The other thing I noticed, like,
Doctor elopes,
when he leaves with the console or tries to dematerialize it, like he isn't even really strapped in. Like, there's nothing attaching him to the console. And if you look at that first scene where he sort of does the trial run, where he doesn't actually in the first attempt go cross over to the other world, he actually lets go at one point. Yeah. Like, he like flies off, like, and you're kind of like, what just happened? And it's glossed over. It's just clearly just done for effect. But it got me wondering, like, well, what if he just let go, and is he just lost forever in the vortex, and the console just goes where it's going?
Headcanon, that is the psychic connection that the TARDIS has to him. Like, she's got a hold of him. She ran away with him.
Well, clearly there's a psychic connection with the car too, because it just goes over for no reason as well. Like, Bessie just arrives in the other world. What are we going to call this other world, by the way, Chris?
Weird.
What should we call it? We could just call it Inferno World, but
Inferno World, alternate world, the darkest timeline.
Fascist Britain world.
It is Fascist Britain. It's kind of weird.
Stallman with two N world.
Stallman with an extra A. We should, before we leave the console, we should mention that this is the last appearance of the very first TARDIS console.
That is true. It's the original prop.
And it's so sad. It's so sad but so appropriate that it ends up on a trash heap off screen. Which is kind of a metaphor for the BBC and how it treated Doctor Who in 1970, and it was just wiping over old episodes willy-nilly. And just, throw the old Houghton console on the trash when you could sell it on eBay in the future for many millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I don't know the background of every single missing episode, but I believe most of them, like most of the Pertwee ones, were they didn't really, like, most of the stuff was missing up until sometime late in Pertwee's era or Tom Baker's, and like the Pertwee ones were more easily recovered, I believe.
Yes, and in fact, I think I read that Inferno was recovered from Canada.
Oh yeah,
from the Canadian broadcast.
CBC was probably doing it.
Yeah, so thank you, Canada.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because there's still a few episodes within Pertwee's first couple of seasons, where only like complete black and white versions exist. Even though I'm not sure if all of them were, but most of them were definitely done in color. And this one, luckily, like we got the full color version of it, which has like the primords and their greenish menace, and the green goop is referred to a lot. So it's obviously, and you get those red hues when the volcanoes and stuff start happening. I think it's really, really effective use of color on this one.
Well, Pete, we are speaking in the week when Zack Snyder's Justice League was released in its 4:3 aspect ratio to preserve the director's original artistic intent, but also released in a black and white version. So
wow.
Black and white is cool again, and I think that they should re-release all of the Pertwee episodes that were also shot in black and white, also screened in black and white, in black and white, and we can have sort of cool noir Doctor Who as an option.
Well, I actually would love them in widescreen. So
yeah,
this one seems very cinematic to me. I really liked the direction, the pacing. There's interesting backstory with the director and the producer. So the director, Douglas Camfield, actually had a heart attack during the filming, and I think he only did like 2 or 3 of the episodes as a director.
Yeah.
And then the producer, Barry Letts, who had been a director, or at least had some skill there, stepped in to finish it off. And I couldn't quite tell. I sort of went back and reviewed some stuff, and I think you can sort of tell by there's a few more cinematic moments, I'd say, in the first couple of episodes. Like, for example, when the first Primord, Slocum, who is the first one infected with the green ooze, starts hammering away sort of in this very bloodthirsty and brutal way on another technician, and it cuts to basically someone hammering a nail into a wall, which was kind of one of those interesting, fun transitions. And there's a few of them later, but I think though that's very Camfield. I think because he was very much a very experienced director, did those sort of cinematic moments.
Yeah, apparently he really wanted to be like a very artsy director, but he got sort of trapped in the action genre.
Which is like, action and art are absolutely, you can do it. Like John Woo, I think, and a lot of Hong Kong action directors took, the art to another level on action, and you can sort of see, like, today, like, there's a lot of things you can do artistic with action, I think, and you see certain hints of it here. Obviously, it's 1970s. It's Doctor Who. They're making it for $5 an episode, but he's coming through. It's very well paced.
He makes a lot of use of very minimal budget in this. Like, there's very minimal number of scenes and a lot of outdoor shooting and kind of the same location, which I believe was an oil refinery in Kent,
right,
near the town of Who, H-O-O, which is very appropriate.
Is that the one that Houghton heard?
Yeah, Houghton definitely heard this Who. He heard Who in Who. But it's a very British, very 70s, very industrial location. Like I could feel the frostbitten winds and the just kind of smell the industrial nastiness, and it took me back to Britain in the 70s and how grim and industrial everything felt.
Well, and there's so much shot on location here. Like they use that to the max, and I think there's some commentary, and it really was nasty. Like, apparently there was no bathroom, and it was just really like you say, it was cold and dirty, and but they used it a lot, and a lot of those stunts, Pertwee obviously insisted on doing them himself, and they probably were like, sure, man, we can't afford a stuntman anyway. But like, he apparently was afraid of heights, and there's a number of scenes where they're up on the ladders, they're on the top of these oil tanks or these chemical tanks, and there's lots of action, there's struggles, there's a point where there's a big stunt where people are falling. There's a couple of them where people, like, bodies fall off these high railings, and Pertwee was actually like afraid of heights, so points to him.
Yeah,
it
was one of the stunts. Yeah, he's 90 foot high at one point, and one of the stunts was a 90-foot fall, and that was the highest fall, I think, in on British TV that had been done until that point. And one of the stuntmen ended up in the hospital in a different scene because Pertwee throws him off the car.
Yeah. There was and
he ends up in the hospital like 18 stitches. So this was real.
Yeah, you could.
You can feel the grittiness of this episode.
You could almost say, like, if it had a different outcome, if it had wasn't as good, if the result wasn't as good, you might even say it was the cursed episode. But no, it's like they paid for it, and it really came through. I mean, the stunts are good; they still hold up. The story's very good, and I got to say, Pertwee's outfit. He's obviously known as the James Bond, the fancy dress doctor. I mean, it's very on here. He sort of, after this episode and subsequent seasons, he was more dinner jacket. I mean, he was still very, very posh, but I think these early episodes, he had the whole cape and the tuxedo. And to see him again, after years of having not watched a Pertwee episode, to see that full the full tuxedo regalia climbing these ladders, and it's the contrast with the actual setting was works. It's just like, oh wow, like he's sort of he's definitely like the sticking out like a sore thumb in this place.
Yeah, the cape is fantastic. It's got that red lining, and it definitely you can see the homage of Capaldi's coat with the red lining, right? Definitely puts you in mind of that. It's very actiony, but yeah, he's super well dressed throughout. He's got I believe it's a black velvet dinner jacket, and the most British thing about this is that even when it's the end of the world and it's supposed to be super hot and there are volcanoes everywhere and they're all talking about how they're dying of heat exhaustion, he still doesn't take his jacket off.
Right. Yeah.
It's very Mad Dogs and Englishmen.
Yeah.
It's just, oh my goodness. There's so many British things about this which we can get into.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's got some of that Time Lord air conditioning unit. I don't know underneath, or maybe he just likes it. Who knows? Maybe he's part Prime Lord. But yeah,
well, it's the British thing. You drink hot tea in the sun to make yourself sweat, so you keep your velvet dinner jacket on to make yourself sweat even more, and then you cool yourself down.
Well, speaking of fashion, I got to say, Sutton's ascot.
Yes.
that ascot should have its own series. He walks in.
So we should talk.
Yeah.
We should talk a little bit about Sutton first. We
Sure.
should introduce them as the actor was, in the very first Doctor Who story in An Unearthly Child.
Yes.
He's one of the cavemen.
Plays Zah. He's one of the main cavemen.
Yes,
Yeah.
he is Zah. Back in the days when Doctor Who characters had only one syllable. That's all they could afford. But he's kind of an unreconstructed caveman when he comes in on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the first thing he does is kind of hits on Dr. Petra, who's Stallman's right-hand woman on the project, and she rebuffs him, which is good and probably easy to do since the actress was the wife of the director.
Right.
I mean, how hard is it if you're an actor to come on set and hit on the director's wife in front of the camera?
Right.
So he does that. It's sort of the most unreconstructed, #MeToo incident probably in all of Doctor Who history.
It could be. I would say there's definitely. I would argue there's a couple moments, at least one or two, that might be even worse in this episode. So it is not. There are moments that have not aged well, and the sexist sort of culture of the 1960s, early 70s definitely comes through. I got to say, when I saw this as a kid, I thought Sutton was so cool, and not necessarily because he hits on the girl as soon as he walks in, which was definitely a trope well into the 80s. It's because he's very much sure of himself. He's very confident. He's clearly the guy who's come in there with the pragmatic point of view around all these bureaucrats or ineffective people. and he's the guy who gets things done. And I think that still works, and I think that aspect of his character holds up. But
you definitely believe him as a character. Like he's the oil rig expert.
yes, he's basically Bruce Willis from Armageddon thrown into this, but regressed about 20 years and made British.
Yeah, and he's sort of his hard-nosed attitude goes up very nicely against Stallman's complete asshole attitude.
Oh yeah, and we can't say enough about that. But just to sort of punctuate the Me Too moments, so there are a couple of moments where Liz isn't treated very well early on, and the doctor even at one point tells her, "Don't ask questions. Please just do what I say." And I just thought, oh, that honestly was the cringiest moment. Because, like,
I think
the other stuff...
Doesn't he even add... I think he says, "There's a good girl," or
yeah,
something?
it's kind of this kind of condescending language. And
Oh
that
my
is
God.
probably, to me, that was the line that aged the worst. And, then she puts up with it. And I guess you could say she puts up with it because he's the doctor and they have a special relationship and all that, but I was like, come on. Now, luckily, Liz is a very good character. Caroline John was great in the part, and I got to say, seeing her again, I hadn't seen a Caroline John Liz Shaw episode in quite some time. I'm definitely more, shall we say, Liz curious than I used to be. She's in her 60s, 70s mini skirts. She's very on it in many ways. I don't know. I thought she was great in both universes, but she redeems herself later on at the end, where the Brigadier kind of goes like, when the doctor comes back and he's unconscious in a coma, he goes, "Well, I'll get a doctor." She goes, "I happen to be a doctor, Brigadier." It's like,
yes,
okay.
You forget I am a doctor, and when he reminds her that she's an employee of UNIT. She sasses him back. It's like she's not afraid of the Brigadier in the slightest.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. But yeah, I think that this is Liz Shaw's last episode.
Oh, so sad.
She doesn't get a farewell. She just, Caroline John was pregnant and therefore went off between seasons, and we get Joe Grant in the next season. But yeah, my headcanon is now that she just kind of didn't want to put up with the sexist bullshit anymore,
right?
And goes back to Cambridge.
Yeah, good for her. But I do think like she had 4 stories. I'd wished she had stayed on a little longer. Now Jo, we could get to her when we talk about some episodes with her, but she takes a little while to get used to. I think Jo does, and I kind of wish we had maybe one more season of Liz, or maybe even half a season. Before sort of switching things up entirely. But this is definitely a great one for her. I mean, she, again, like was as fascist Liz, she's clearly having a great time along with every other character. And her character, I think, more than the others, sort of plays that sort of straddles the two, the good and the evil in the character really, really well in Inferno World.
Yeah.
And
so in our world, she's a scientist, and then in Inferno World, she's in the military. But kind of redeems herself by shooting the evil Brigadier at the end. We should mention that she has probably one of the worst wigs in Doctor Who as evil Liz.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, she's not well
and
served
she's
by
got
it.
this sort of...
I don't know. Like I feel like the dark hair works, but it's very like they clearly just tucked everything under and put this mop on it, and it doesn't quite work.
It looks like a parody of a Beatles haircut.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, both worlds, what I liked about it is she clearly has an instant connection with the Doctor, like in the Inferno world, like that there's something about his relationship with her that transfers over in sort of both universes, and so that's how she could kind of sort of gradually win her over. Like she respects his intellect, and maybe that's inherent to her being sort of a scientist or have scientific aspirations in both worlds.
Yeah.
And
so personally, I should, on a personal note with Liz Shaw, so my dad was a big fan of the Pertwee era. Troughton was his favorite Doctor. That was very much his.
Right.
Like he was watching it from the early 60s, started, and then loved Troughton. But really, it's kind of had a fondness for Pertwee. And growing up with Tom Baker, I would often get the, well, he isn't as good as Pertwee, response from my dad. And specifically, I think like the BBC may have shown a few Joe Grant episodes, and then my dad would be like, "Oh well, she's not as good as Liz Shaw," which I hadn't seen any Liz Shaw episodes, didn't know anything about her, but sort of she had this mythic quality because my dad would rhapsodize about what a good character she was and how much more intelligent she was.
And it takes a while before the Doctor gets someone who's kind of his equivalent again. And I would argue it would probably be until Romana. Even though Sarah Jane is very, very good, you don't get quite the same, reasonably go toe-to-toe, believably go toe-to-toe with the Doctor in terms of his innovation and his mind. Liz definitely has that in spades.
Which shows that we're very much in the era of women's lib, it's as much of a thing in the UK as it was in the US, probably more so in the US, but definitely, I think even does our oil drilling guy, he mentions it at one point, I believe, or maybe I'm thinking of the novelization, but it's in the air, and it makes the treatment of Petra, that much more outrageous. They kind of knew this was wrong. But then again, they're sort of showing how workplaces really were. So, points to Doctor Who for being a little bit feminist, I guess.
What did you think of the message of the serial? Like, obviously, there's the environmental message that's front and center. I liked that it wasn't just this environmental message, like, oh yeah, let's not overmine the earth or stress the earth for greed or progress. But it also has this sort of government complicity angle where, Stallman has, in our world, has clearly gotten the backing of the government, and they're kind of like, it's kind of like this somewhat feckless, kind of ineffective government in terms of its oversight responsibilities, going like shrugging, well, he's the expert, like, let him do it. And of course, like, he could go ahead and do whatever he wants because he's promised us something awesome. Which, by the way, I'm just going to say, like, how did this get approved exactly? Like, he's talking about, like, okay, there's Stallman's gas under the crust, and we're going to get it. All we have to do is mine 20 miles or whatever. Like, did anyone go, like, what's your evidence? Like, where is this gas? Like, do you have any of this gas? Could we see the gas?
He's hypothesized it, and he's a white man who, talks very arrogantly, therefore let's give him money.
Right.
It's interesting because as a Brit in the early 70s, you would hear Stallman's gas, and you would definitely think of North Sea gas.
Right.
Where the drilling was very much on everyone's minds, and the bounty of North Sea oil was just starting to seep in to British culture. We wouldn't really get it until the late 70s, but definitely on everyone's mind. We didn't yet have the energy crisis, but I think a lot of people were prophesying that it was coming, and we couldn't keep going. We couldn't keep supplying electricity. The undercurrent of all of this is the industrial action in the late 60s, early 70s. There was a lot of that, and we're just 3 years away from the miners' strike, which would plunge Britain into the 3-day week, and power outages and all of that. So I can see the British government kind of panicking and saying, let's just, this guy says he can bring us energy from under the Earth's crust, let's do it. Never mind the green ooze that appears to be leaking out of the Earth's crust. I can totally see that. But Stallman is like, he is the ultimate scientist asshole. I think he's, if Richard Attenborough in Jurassic Park were just like less of a people person, he would be Stallman. He's sort of the Trumpian equivalent of Richard Attenborough's character. It's he is the ultimate embodiment of you are so preoccupied with whether you could that you didn't think about whether you should.
100%.
He should.
He definitely should.
He's all about should.
So Stallman is played by an actor named Olaf Pooley, and I cannot say enough good things about his performance because he is just the guy you love to hate. And I think he is such a good villain in this story because he's so believable. We've all worked with or for, unfortunately, a guy like this. Maybe less so today, here looking back in 2021, where now everything is kind of a little more touchy-feely and letting it hang out. But I've definitely worked for people like this. And
well, he's the ultimate. He's the put down artist, right? He's got a put down for everyone. He's the government official. Sir Marcus Gold, I think it is.
Sir Keith Gold.
Sir Keith Gold. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with Marcus Stallman, who's in the Pyramids of Mars. But Sir Keith Gold, he puts him down with shouldn't you be running the cafeteria?
Oh yes, that line. And I think it actually comes as early as episode 1. It is some of the most belittling dialogue I think I have ever put that has ever been put to page, and it just comes off Stallman, the actor's lips, perfectly, and you're just like, whoa! Like right off the get go, you just love to hate this guy. You just like I want to see this guy taken down, and of course he very quickly butts heads with the Doctor, and you rarely see the Doctor get so agitated. He actually calls him like a nitwit at one point. He is very much like does not like Stallman from the get-go, and they, he gets under the Doctor's skin in ways even I think the Master can't. Yeah, it's very big.
Yeah, we're one episode away from seeing the Master, and you could sort of see the Stallman as a proto-Master in a lot of ways, because he's just got that kind of complete air of superiority. I think in a documentary about this, how this was made, Nick Courtney noticed that the name of the actor Olaf is very close to aloof.
Right.
He's kind of so perfect for the role for that reason. He's so aloof. He so looks down at everyone. Has the perfect put down. Completely unflappable in the sense that he's completely in a flap the whole time anyway. But his insults land. They put everyone down. Even the Doctor kind of respects his scientific acumen.
Right.
But he's got this sort of, libertarian entrepreneurial approach. Like these days, he'd be a kind of an Elon Musk character.
Right.
Like, get out of my face, government bureaucrats. None of you understand. This is about the science. If I had to go at your pace, we'll never get this done. He's driven.
Yeah.
So you kind of respect that. And, we've got lots of reasons why the TARDIS randomizer might have brought us here. A kind of a spooky number of reasons, actually. But this is the first, is that, we compare Marcus Scarman from Pyramids of Mars to Professor Stallman. Very similar names, complete polar opposites in terms of Doctor Who villains.
Right.
Like Scarman is mind controlled from almost the first moment where he enters the Egyptian tomb, and is kind of a flat villain because of it. I mean, they're both extremely one-dimensional characters. We should say that. Yes. They both just are very single-minded, even if Stallman isn't mind-controlled. But Stallman just doesn't feel one-dimensional. Like, you genuinely feel that this is just who he is. This is his life. He eats, breathes, and sleeps work. And he's probably going to drive himself into a heart attack like the director did. And it's kind of an interesting fact that the director did have a heart attack on set because he was so driven.
Yeah.
Kind of worked himself into the ground. Because Stallman is that too. So it's an interesting marriage of director and character.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like you say, Scarman, he's scary, but he's not really that memorable. Because he's so mind-controlled and just a little bit zombie-like throughout. And then, but Stallman is very, very, very memorable. He's so memorable and effective. I think what happens when he essentially goes full Primord, the story kind of loses something. And it's so refreshing to have that conflict resurrected in episode 7 when they come back to the real world. Because
we have two Stallmans, so you can throw one away.
Yeah, once he becomes full Primord in Inferno Earth, he has a couple scary moments as a Primord, and I think the scariest one, he hasn't gone full Primord yet, but it's one of the honestly grossest, most terrifying moments in the whole series, where he grabs unconscious technicians and he dunks their faces in the green goop. I honestly almost had to look away because I was just like, oh my god, like. And it's horrific, like, because we know what it does to people. We know it's scorching, And even though the effect, like, I mean, it's really literally they're putting just an actor and some Jello. It's not really much of anything as an effect. It's just the moment is so heart wrenching. And then that's kind of like, then he's kind of full Wolfman, and then they have to fight the Primords, and of course they kind of need that, or the story isn't really that interesting. But it's definitely less interesting once that character isn't in anymore. And so, it's very, very...
So he starts his Primord transformation kind of early, and he puts white gloves on to cover up the fact that his hands have gone green. But it's not even that they've gone fully green. It reminds me a lot of in primary school in the UK. You'd have watercolors. You play with watercolors, and you'd end up with kind of watercolor paint all over your hands. Right. That's the special effect here.
Yeah, true. And it's taped on.
In fact, I think we had that exact shade of green. It's like this sort of sickly dark green. It reminded me very much of my hands as a kid. So I love that.
Yeah, definitely more effective when it was on the face, because it definitely looks like the people are ill when they have it all over their face. They went all out on the makeup for those various sort of half Primord folks. It's really scary. I got to say, to talk a little bit more about the Primords, and I would argue this is the most effective zombie horror Doctor Who has ever done, because they're really like frightening by sort of what they can do, and that you're so easily sort of transformed. All they have to do is touch you. They have sort of this super strength. They're clearly sort of mindless, but not entirely mindless. One of the most interesting things that's never really answered in the show is, while Stallman's transforming, how much of his behavior is influenced by him becoming this subhuman beast, and how much is really just him being a dick. Because it's very hard to tell.
It's the question of our times.
And I will say, this is the thing that kind of haunts me a little bit from the episode, is that in the real world, he forces everyone out of the drill head at the very end, and says, everyone get out of here. He wants to be in there alone. And I kind of almost feel like that's his moment of redemption, and that the real Stallman's kind of trying to fight through the influence, and he's trying to save everybody. Even though he can't help himself, but sort of try to it's like sort of a vampire that needs blood, or an addict. He needs to sort of complete this and release Stallman's gas. For some reason, there's an element of humanity that sort of wants him not to succeed. I don't know. What did you think?
I think that's just my take on that. Is he's just he's casting people aside. He has this sort of et tu Petra moment, which he really should have said et tu and not you also, Petra. And then he's like, you're all assholes. I've can obviously only do this by myself. Again, very Trumpian. He's like, I alone can fix this. And he rushes in, and he has the largest name tag on his his suit that I think I've ever seen anyone have. This giant Stallman name tag when he goes in there. It's fantastic. But yeah, the Primords are never named in the show. We only know that they're called Primords from the credits. They're not even named in the Target novelization that Terrence Sticks
What do they call them?
They're just sort of... He mentions that they're primal beasts,
right,
or something like that. He doesn't...
Just beast creatures.
He just... Something almost primitive about the man's bulky, broad-shouldered body. Yeah.
They definitely put in some cheap kind of like hunchback stuff in, just stuff the shoulders of the extras and the actors who did them, which doesn't quite work. I wish they had done that a little better, because it's so obvious.
I think is it Benton's character that goes very when Benton transforms into a Primord, he's very Richard III.
Yeah, well, that works. I mean, I thought that the actual makeup of the Primords is quite good, and the Benton transformation, again, is one of those really scary moments where it happens very quickly, and he's full Wolfman in a matter of seconds. That's very, very interesting. I mean, one of the scariest things about zombies and monsters like them is that you can become one of them, and seeing that process sort of happen, particularly to a sort of quote unquote main character. I mean, it's kind of like a guest character at this time, but everyone loves Benton. Yeah, very effective.
Yeah.
It's one of the fun things you can always do when you go to the parallel world. You can start sort of killing off your regulars and not have to worry too much about keeping them in for the next story. It's you kind of obligated when you do a parallel world. You gotta kill off someone major.
It's kind of sad because Benton doesn't really change between the worlds. He's the only one who doesn't change, really. He's just Benton. He's Benton in every universe. Like, the Brigadier gets evil, he gets a scar and an eye patch, which we'll get to. Liz Shaw gets her Beatles haircut. And Benton is just Benton.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's very much a bigger dick in Inferno Earth.
Well, you'd have to be. You'd have to be to get on in fascist Britain.
Yeah, he's definitely figured out how to do it. But he doesn't get a different wig. That's true. He's just same outfit pretty much, just with the RSF on the side. They get different weapons. I think they get these interesting sort of Russian rifles. I was reading for Inferno Earth. It's really cool because it shows that they sort of thought about it, right? Like what would be sort of subtly different, what wouldn't be, in the differences between the two worlds. I like that in the Doctor's hut is full of books in his world, and then it's just like filing cabinets and stuff in Inferno Earth.
Ooh. They get rid of the books. I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, well, it's like that's what I like about they weren't lazy about it. They weren't like, who's going to notice? Maybe just straighten the books for the other thing. Next, no, like this is it's almost,
they would have burned the books.
Exactly, right? Like there's definitely a subtle message going on there. I think with a lot of it.
So let's talk about alternate fascist Britain.
Let's.
Yes, which is obviously modelled on 1984. Unity is strength. It's the slogan that's up in the Doctor's hut. That's his first tip-off that that he's in this alternate fascist world. And we get a little bit of dialogue that explains... First of all, we get the BBC... What is he? The head of creative... the head of special effects of the BBC is the Big Brother figure.
Yeah.
Who's just...
He definitely looks
the
part
on every wall.
There's an interesting side note. The funny side note that in the novels, apparently they say that, I haven't read this, but they say that person is the alternate, that the Inferno Earth's version of the Doctor. So the Doctor rules fascist Britain in Inferno World.
He does look a little bit Doctor-esque. He's kind of Peter Cushing Doctor almost.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe now with post Fugitive of the Jadoon, maybe it really was the Doctor.
Yeah, I love it. The headcanon could go in all sorts of directions. But the we have, so the Doctor sees this image. He sees Unity as strength. He sees the logo of this future fascist Britain, which is arrows pointing in all directions, which is perhaps not the best thought through fascist logo ever created.
Well, also, especially since I would see it on those doors, and I was like, "Is that telling me how to open the door? Do I pull it in 3 different ways to open this thing? Like, what does that mean?" But yeah, interesting choice.
Yeah, they're not pulling in all directions in this fascist Britain. So we get a little bit of dialogue that I think we hear that the switch happened in 1943.
Okay,
That's where fascist Britain starts, and they get rid of the royal family, and the Doctor reminisces about meeting the Queen's great-grandfather. Not sure exactly who he's referring to. I guess that would be Edward VII, who's sort of famously louche, and the Doctor apparently hung out with him. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in the novelization, it gets in a bit deeper, and the Doctor deduces from what he learns that what happens is Britain just didn't enter World War II, which is very, kind of chilling because, of course, that nearly happened. It very nearly happened that we had, that we sort of surrendered to Hitler preemptively. The Lord Halifax and the anti-Churchill contingent in the cabinet in 1940 were all like, we can't face the Nazi menace. Let's just give in. Let's just make our peace.
Gotcha.
And then
pro-appeasement
in the Target novelization, it's total appeasement. And in the Target novelization, the Doctor's like, well, then that must have given aid and comfort to the British fascists, the Oswald Mosley types, who then just had a coup.
Right. Seized power. Interesting.
And we're told that this fascist Britain is Republican, so they've gotten rid of the royal family. But what we know now, more than we knew in 1970, I think, is that wouldn't even be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even need to get rid of Britain's natural royalism and love of the royal family, because Edward VIII, the Duke of Windsor, was super fascist himself. He was a big fan of Hitler, and it was definitely part of Hitler's plan, if he had actually conquered Britain, to bring back Edward VIII.
Interesting.
And let him rule as a
puppet dictator,
puppet monarch. Yeah. So kind of chilling for that reason, and I think another reason why the TARDIS randomizer brought us here is, republicanism in Britain is being discussed again in the wake of the Meghan Markle and Prince Harry interview.
Yeah.
So it's like we're at a sort of a high point for getting rid of the royal family in Britain. But also Britain is, I don't want to say it's getting fascist, but certainly Boris Johnson's government is exhibiting certain aspects of, lying through its teeth, and we've learned this week that they're going to make all government buildings fly Union Jacks constantly throughout the week, which is not a thing in Britain. I know it's a thing in the US that you fly the US flag. US flag is seen much more often in daily life. In Britain, it's sort of seen as a bit kind of extreme right wing to do that. So these are scary times for real, and this was a super interesting and chilling moment to watch Inferno for that reason. So it definitely holds up.
That doesn't mean Rose is extreme right wing, right? Because she loved that Union Jack like tank top or something.
Oh yeah. Wearing it as a t-shirt is fine.
A t-shirt different. It's a different thing. Yeah, I can't speak to much of the politics, though. I kind of got the sense that when they said that, and he says it with such anger when the brigade leader says, executed all of them. Like, he just sort of says, yeah, we killed the royal family, like, half proud, half, like, it's like we did it, like when you challenge a child of, like, about something bad they did, and they sort of instead sort of surprise you, instead of responding with shame, with sort of pride and defiance. So I got that to mean for a 1970s audience in Britain that this is the level of assholism that we're dealing with here. They're really this evil, that they've not only taken away the royal institution, they've done it with sort of pride and defiance. And I would think for the audience a lot of the audience would react with revulsion, which is what they were sort of like trying to go for there.
Never mind the eye patch and the scar. This is what makes them really evil. They killed the royal family.
Right, and it said the way he says all of them. Like we even got and the implication there, if you think about it even a little bit, is like, wow, the kids too. That would have to be. That
definitely would have made people think of the execution of the Russian royal family.
Yes.
Which only Anastasia supposedly survived. So definitely, within living memory for most of the audience, the threat of fascism from World War II and the threat of fascism in Britain.
Yeah.
There is a scene that was broadcast over this side of the pond where John Pertwee does a radio voice that's basically supposed to be Lord Haw-Haw, William Joyce, the famous propagandist. British propagandist who was broadcasting from Berlin throughout World War II. It was cut from the British version because it's so obviously Pertwee, and it's obviously one of Pertwee's silly voices. But I guess they felt in America that you wouldn't recognize that.
And I didn't. I remember seeing that scene where they're sort of leaning over the radio and they talk about there's eruptions everywhere, and the mining project is in Eastchester, which is never said anywhere else. But they kept it in for foreign audiences, I guess, because we wouldn't be as familiar with Pertwee. I certainly wasn't. And I had to be told, oh, that's actually Pertwee's voice. And then I've only seen that scene sort of in clips here and there since. It's like, oh, yeah, I didn't hear it before, but now I do. You got okay, yeah, that's Pertwee just kind of holding his nose, I guess. and getting all a little more
I
nasal.
think it's a shame. Yeah, because we don't now, even in Britain, I don't think we necessarily remember Pertwee that much as a comic actor, as much as we remember him. Doctor Who, and Wurzel Gummidge. Do you guys know Wurzel Gummidge over there?
I don't. I can't speak for all of my
That's
fellow countrymen in North America.
that's John Pertwee's. It's his other famous role. He went on to do it after Doctor Who. He plays a scarecrow, who talks in this very sort of high-pitched West Country accent. But yeah, we loved Wurzel Gummidge, and that's the other famous Pertwee role. But the voice sounds nothing like that. So yeah, I would lobby to have that scene included, in the official version of Inferno, because we need more of alternate fascist Britain.
Yeah, I think the problem now is that there's been so much discussion about the scene. Like, you have to wonder, like, all Doctor Who fans are now will only hear John Pertwee, right? But then, is that who it's for? I don't know. Like, you're always trying to get more audience. So I'd say, yeah, put it back in, because it does sort of hammer home, I think, the isolation they're getting right into that at the end there, that things are getting hopeless, and that, kind of the world is doomed in Inferno Earth. Speaking of that, so this is one of sort of the plot hole that still kind of bugs me, and it's not overt, but it is the one thing that bugs me the most about the episode. How does the Doctor know in Inferno Earth that the penetration to the Earth's mantle, well, they call it the core, technically the mantle, will destroy the Earth? Like, it's that they shouldn't do it, because at some point he just, I think it's the end of episode 4, where he's just so desperate for them to stop, and at this point it hasn't happened. Like, it's certainly understandable later in Earth Prime when he's seen the destruction, but he wants them to stop because he thinks it's going to be a disaster, and then he's also like, he's so sure it can't be stopped, like, once they penetrate, there's no force in this Earth that'll, like, where does he ever get that information?
My headcanon on this is going to be that he, during his sideways acid trip, which is very, very psychedelic, super 70s, 2001 style, or as close as Doctor Who could get on his budget,
right,
that he sort of has a maybe a future glimpse there. Maybe that affords him a little going forward in time and seeing the result of that. But yeah, or maybe he's doing the calculations from his head from the computer that Stallman sabotages and hides the microchip from.
Well, the computer is the one thing, because that then it's kind of like, it sort of makes sense, but the only time he was exposed to it was in Earth Prime, and he kind of walks away. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of is like, all right, well, I've done all I can to convince you to do whatever you want, but if the stakes are really that high, I mean, we know the Doctor would never do that, right? So clearly he needed something else. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's that combined with his trip. I don't know. It's never made clear why he suddenly has this desperate need to stop it before he even has seen what the result will be. Yeah.
Yep.
And then he's uncharacteristically giving up hope as soon as it happens, which, is probably correct, but I mean, that's also not very doctorish.
Also unclear as why he can't take anyone from Parallel Earth back with him when he returns for the console.
Yeah. Like, you did it, dude.
He explains it away. By basically saying the universe is going to explode.
Yeah, like there'd be some kind of dimensional paradox. Like, it's all technobabble. Yeah. He just says, I can't do it. And I think, given sort of sci-fi of the era, I think that was kind of a thing that was brought up more often. Things would break apart. And that was actually even a thing and I think done more believably when they did, and it took them a long time to do it, another Parallel Earth episode when they had Rise of the Cybermen and, what they called Pete's World. So when they were jumping dimensions between the two worlds a bunch of times, they were saying, well, that the barriers between the two dimensions are weakening and it's going to destroy both universes soon. Whereas here, there's no real mention of that. So I guess other than what the Doctor says, but it doesn't seem very well supported. It just seems like he doesn't want to.
My problem with parallel world stories in a lot of different franchises is that the parallel people kind of sort of accept their parallelness a little too readily.
Right.
Like, oh, we're dying, but at least you can save the versions of us on this other world. Like, I'm with the fascist brigade leader on this one. Like,
Yeah.
screw that other guy. Why wouldn't you just sort of, care more about yourself than this? Let that other guy blow up.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, they kind of just give into it. They hear the story and they're like, oh well, I guess we're doomed. So might as well save alt me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of fascist brigade leader, I got to say, of all the
Yes.
alternate performances, I love Nick Courtney. I think he is so relishing being a bad guy. They all are, but he's doing it in this way that I thought was very like deliberate and controlled for most of it. And I never was not believing he was an alternate version of himself. And he I don't know, maybe it's because he is a military man and he's very, he needs to be sort of confident and arrogant in his own way in our universe, that twisting that a little bit, making slightly darker choices and, clipping his language a little more. It's so him, but not him. I mean, it's so bullseye in terms of a performance. My hat is completely off to him.
The eye patch as an indicator that we're in the parallel world is, I think, superior to the goatee of the Star Trek Mirror
Well, the
universe.
funny thing is, it's for facial hair, it's the reverse, right? Because everyone has a mustache or a goatee in our universe. But then when they go to Inferno Earth, like Stallman is clean shaven, the Brigadier is clean shaven, and it's like, oh, like razors are all the rage over there. I guess didn't have the swinging '60s quite in the same way.
Well, that was very much a thing in 1984, that everyone's clean-shaven and everyone's begging each other for razors. So, maybe that's another example of 1984 influence. But we should talk, speaking of the eye patch, we should talk about the eye patch story, which is kind of famous in Doctor Who fan circles.
Yeah, so apparently, I guess...
Yes.
Was it the first scene where... I think it's the first scene where he whirls around, the first time we actually see the brigade leader, and he has the eye patch... when they were shooting that scene, while the chair was turned around, the whole cast also put on eye patches as a joke for Nick Courtney. He turns around, and instead of breaking up laughing, he just does the scene. He just like completely believably like just does the character, and everyone else I think ended up cracking up. But it sounds a little bit like an urban legend, I guess.
It does. It kind of sounds like the kind of story that gets conflated over time. And the reason I don't believe that it actually happened during the scene that they filmed is, A, they had like a day or two of rehearsal beforehand, so if it was going to happen any time, it would have been there. B, the director Douglas Camfield was sort of renowned for his military efficiency,
right, and
putting the fear of God into people. So I don't think that they would have had a joke like that on set. But I got to tell you, Pete, I first of all, I was super surprised by the alternate universe twist here. Because I mentioned I knew nothing about Inferno. I loved being surprised by it. It's so rare with classic Who. The story hasn't been repeated and talked about to death to the point where I'd heard about it.
Right.
So I love the twist.
I'm jealous of you that being able to go
but
into this one completely unspoiled.
That's part of the reason why it really worked for me. But when I saw the eye patch, as soon as I saw the eye patch, I was like, oh, the eye patch story. Like, even I could remember the eye patch story. And it's such a good story. I really want it to be true. But, it makes you giggle, this thought of him turning around and everyone's wearing an eye patch. It's so Monty Python-esque that, which, by the way, was on British TV at the same time.
Oh, that's right.
But I love it. And, the idea that the whole crew was wearing eye patches as well. And that somehow they'd all managed to sneak them on while his chair was turned.
Right.
I love that idea.
It must have been turned for quite a while. But I think you're right. It's probably more of a rehearsal thing. Maybe not everybody did it. There must be some version that's true. And that's probably been embellished over the years. But good times. He also has that scar. Which it's never explained, but presumably I think Nick Courtney at one point said, "Oh yeah, maybe his eye was gouged out in some kind of duel." Might have been explained.
Yeah, I think the director came up with that idea that it was some sort of duel that they'd had. and referred to it as the. He made some reference to Sherlock Holmes as the fencing incident where it happened, the location where it happened. But yeah,
well,
just a fascinating little bit of extra depth.
It sure wasn't gouged out by a fire extinguisher, which ends up being the the primary weapon they use against the zombie primord thingies. It's funny, like I don't know. I'm curious because you were going into this, went into this cold, so to speak. Were you struck by the number of fire extinguishers in the shots early on? Because it's clearly they're trying to do some sort of subtle foreshadowing, I guess, with all these fire extinguishers. But what did you think about it?
That just sort of read as, this is, health and safety gone mad. It's a classic British thing of just put fire extinguishers out. They're everywhere in British life anyway. But I love the idea that it was actually Chekhov's fire extinguisher.
Right.
And that it would go off in the final episode. But they were using real fire extinguishers in this. And the idea is that the cold kind of kills the primords or disables them. But yeah, it was actually CO2.
Which is very cold.
Super cold.
It's funny, like that the idea that they used real fire extinguishers, and obviously for budget issues, it reminds me of this old Flintstones episode where, as a gag, when Fred is like on the set of some movie they're doing, they're like, "All right, someone bring in the fake rocks," and it's like, "Hey, do you know how much fake rocks cost?" It's like, "All right, we'll use real ones." Like, that's pretty much what happened here.
Real fire extinguishers. When I think fire extinguishers at the BBC, I always think of there's an episode of Fawlty Towers, the Germans, the famous "Don't Mention the War" episode where Basil is supposed to be knocked out by a fire extinguisher, but it doesn't actually go off in the shot, and they're just like, screw it, just leave it in, and it's just like this thin jet of nonsense. It's not like a proper fire extinguisher, but it still, knocks Basil Fawlty out. So I'm like, fair play to them for actually getting their fire extinguishers to work, and for having, a weapon in the episode that isn't guns.
Right. Although they definitely use guns
very
a lot.
Doctor Who-ish. They use guns. You see the sort of the flickering on the screen that would happen in those days. Those lines that appear on the screen, which is very Caves of Androzani-esque. Whenever you fire a gun, there's a lot of machine guns in Caves of Androzani.
The last thing
the screen gets all those lines.
Oh, absolutely. The last thing I would say about the fire extinguishers, and it's bothered me to this day, honestly, ever since I first saw it, is that they don't really pay attention to the continuity of them later in the episode, and you see them like there's tons of fire extinguishers in main control, yet they're for some reason they're only using one, and when it runs out they're worried, right? Like, just go grab another one from the wall. Like, why don't you do that? Like, there's a bunch of scenes where I'm wondering, like, why don't they just do that? And then when they get the monster fire extinguisher of the coolant pipe, the effect is really muted. I mean, you're kind of envisioning this fire hose type thing, and it just comes out, and it's this sort of weak fog smoke and you're like, okay, I guess. And it's one of those things where they talk it up in theory, and then in practice it's just not very good.
Yeah, Doctor, you'll have the biggest fire extinguisher ever, or and then yes, it's £5 worth of dry ice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but
it's super BBC.
But just generally, like, as an action yarn, I thought this was really, really good. It actually had like very James Bondy vibes to me. There's lots of action. There's like the hero alone against the totalitarian regime, which is kind of like Bond behind enemy lines somewhere in the Iron Curtain or whatever. You have the jerky villain, of course, and Stallman is like, he feels like a James Bond villain that's been transported to Doctor Who. There's chases all over the place. Like, he's in the car and getting shot at. He's running around the facility, and he gets at one point he gets that heat suit disguise on, which felt like a very James Bond move, and he sort of pretends to be one of these workers to sort of infiltrate the central control at the end. And then, of course, the whole place blows up, which is a James Bond trope. It's like at the end, and the villain headquarters always has to blow up. In this case, it also blows up the world. But So yeah, like just really much, very much a James
And we
Bond.
get just a few scenes. We get a few scenes, and I wish we'd had more of this, of people kind of wandering around in the apocalyptic devastation
I
of it all,
know.
right at the very end, which is very sort of Threads, very The Day After.
Yeah.
And it gets very dark, and I love that. And I wish they'd sort of turned that up to 11.
Yeah, it's you're almost a little confused by it. It's so out of nowhere, and you kind of wish they had sort of earned that or laid some bits here and there somewhere throughout. They certainly had time to do that. It comes out, but it's still pretty effective at the end when the final sort of explosion happens.
So a lot of it's aged well. Things that have not aged well. The the door handle. We should talk about this. The door handle, which is basically the sonic screwdriver.
Right. The single-purpose sonic screwdriver.
And it's not named as such. Single-purpose sonic screwdriver, which is basically a garage door opener. Now it is, I shall say, as a complete nerd, I went and looked at the Target novelization. It is identified by Terrence Dicks as the Sonic in the Target novelization. In the show, it's just called the door handle. And everyone is just absolutely amazed at this super new technology that you can open doors remotely.
Right.
With it. And specifically the doors of the hut that the Doctor's in as like a security measure. He has one. Liz has one.
Right.
Which, is this the only example of Companion having their own Sonic?
Other than Sarah later, who has the Sonic lipstick. But it's not even a joke. That's from Sarah Jane Adventures. But the, yeah.
In terms of screwdrivers.
So I actually looked up the history of automatic doors. And if you go to theautomaticdoorco.com, they have a short page of it. So I guess automatic doors were a thing invented in 1954, but they didn't really combine them with motion sensors until the late 60s, early 70s. So it wasn't until the early 70s that like supermarkets and everywhere else, I guess, started putting in automatic doors. So I guess this is the Inferno aired in spring 1970. I guess it was like really futuristic or somewhat futuristic then. And even though this is,
but I mean, it's basically a garage door opener, right? Which, yes, motion sensors come along a lot later, but the garage door opener with a remote was invented in the early 30s in the US. And I think what this tells us is, it's definitely a sign of how, I don't want to say Britain was backward in the 70s, but it certainly wasn't the US consumerist culture that was going on at the same time. It was sort of very dour and minimalist and drab, and people had mostly black and white TVs, and you definitely weren't experiencing the economic boom that the US had. So yeah, the Doctor could wow people with this super-powered garage
crazy
door.
future technology. What bothers me about it, or what bothered me about it for a moment, was that Liz actually asks him to open the door at one point, so you think that's the one unit, and then she produces her own unit later. Like, I guess she just couldn't find it in her bag. I mean, I don't know.
It's just a total power play. It's like she's really getting the Doctor to do her bidding.
Well, there you go. Then it works. The other thing, this is
it's striking back.
I believe this might be it's certainly the first reference to Batman in Doctor Who. And it's kind of like a groan moment, but it is like, oh my God. It's like definitely an OMG moment where Sutton comes in, looks at the console, makes the same observation we did earlier, which is that it doesn't look that impressive. And he goes, well, what'd you expect? Some kind of space rocket with Batman at the controls? And you're just like, did he just say Like, literally, I remember the first time I saw it, did he just say Batman? Did he say Batman? Really? Batman is a...
Batman now officially exists in Doctor Who
continuity. And in both universes.
And not just that, but Batman... Yes. Well, which makes sense, because Batman was invented in the 30s.
Okay. So if it diverged in the 40s, that would make sense, yeah.
Yeah. So clearly, fascist Britain is diverting its populace with the bread and circuses of Batman comic strips.
Yeah. We'll go with that.
Because Batman, kind of a fascist character. So,
okay.
Makes sense that they'd
settle down now. It's all good.
Sorry, Batman fans.
So, what do you think? Like, this is one of the best things about this episode, and we've covered a lot of it, but one of the best is the dialogue, I think. And there are so many good classic lines in Inferno. I'll tell you my favorite, but what's yours? Do you have a favorite of all the lines in the episode?
I kind of like the sound of the planet screaming out its rage. And, because that sort of, that ties into the whole eco message of it, but also kind of the part that definitely holds up well now in 2021, where we are very much experiencing the planet screaming out its rage. That's kind of the, in a nutshell, why we shouldn't do these experiments that are still going on to drill into the Earth's crust. Stop it, people. I believe there was an Indian experiment recently that almost got down to the record. The record is something like 1.5 kilometers down.
Well, that's not nowhere near.
And yeah,
you'd have to go like 20 miles, I think, or 20 kilometers, or something. It depends out there. There are definitely thinner spots. I don't think East Chester is necessarily the best choice, but there were. As
a side note, there is a thing below the crust called the Moho discontinuity, or Mohorovic discontinuity, to give it its full name, which sounds like Doctor Who technobabble in itself, but it's real. That's the kind of the cool thing about this episode, is it deals with a real thing that we still don't know anything about for sure.
No, absolutely.
I mean, it could be green ooze down there, for all we know.
And it could maybe destroy the planet if we unearth it, but I find that unlikely. That's kind of one of the things that, like, the fundamentals of this episode don't quite hold up, and it was probably a big reason why it's never referred to again, whether Stallman gas exists or not, whether or not punching through the Earth's crust would necessarily destroy the Earth. I think it's kind of pretty obvious it wouldn't. I mean, particularly since, like, asteroids have hit the Earth, some of them mammoth in size, and may have, I'm not a geologist, or I don't know what the word term is for a geologist that looks at ancient rock patterns, but I'm sure there have been impacts that have at least come close, if not penetrated it, and the Earth is still here. So it is like, all of that is pretty far-fetched. But it's just, to your point, like, it's just unknown enough, even to this day, that you could still kind of like, okay, that works. I'll buy it. The suspension of disbelief it's easy to go along for the ride.
Yeah, the Earth dies screaming. It totally plays on a thing that could still be, like, even this week we had video footage from a volcano in Iceland erupting and spreading magma everywhere. So it gets to this primal fear that we all have of what's right under our feet.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good line. I have a couple. So I think growing up, I think my favorite line is where the Doctor says, so free will is not an illusion after all. And this is at the very end, when he's come back from, slipping sideways in time, as he puts it. And I found it really interesting, both for the Doctor as a character, because clearly going to other dimensions is new to him, and he didn't really know what the implications of doing that would be, and how he realizes that you really can, choose something, and you're not necessarily locked into that choice, and maybe that creates another universe, or maybe it doesn't. But I mean, it's like there are alternatives, and I thought that was just kind of a magical moment in terms of just metaphysics for the show to sort of come out and say that.
It comes from the fact that Sir Keith has survived the car accident that kills him in the other universe. So I don't necessarily know is the best explanation of free will, because what exactly has changed?
Well, what exactly? What's the decision? No,
what's the moment of free will?
Yeah, it shows, but I think it just shows him that you can, on a physical level, and when you look at the physics of it, things can change. That one resonated with me growing up, and I was always fascinated with sort of ontological challenges, parallel worlds. I was a big fan of the Star Trek episode Mirror Mirror. It's a classic. A lot of people like it. It's obviously had many sequels and novels, comics, and the show itself in Star Trek. They love going to their parallel worlds, the mirror universe in particular. So this idea of a dystopian alternate Earth has always been interesting. I always also liked the show Sliders, which was obviously that was the entire premise of that show was going to parallel Earths, and some were evil, some were dystopian. There was actually one of the very early episodes of Sliders was Pandemic Earth, which we have just lived through the last year. But I remember being the big nerd that I am, thinking about that episode when the pandemic really set in last year, and that like, wow, we're Pandemic Earth now. There might be some alternate Earth which is normal Earth, but that's us.
Yeah, where someone made a different decision to not go into a Batcave.
Right, exactly. So that was a great line for me. But honestly, this time around, the line that stood out for me the most was when the doctor's sort of really trying to implore a fascist Liz to think for herself. And he says, whatever they've taught you in this bigoted world, you've still got a mind of your own. I thought that was really good. Especially, if you think of Doctor Who as a kid's show, this idea, like, you need to think for yourself, like, and that being a critical thinker and getting your own information is crucial to anyone's growth as a human being. I know it's a very sort of simple and maybe obvious message, but said in this way to this character, I think made it resonate probably more than that message has ever come through in Doctor Who, and I really, really liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of it doesn't beat you over the head with a message, this episode, but lines like that just kind of, they land, and it doesn't feel like, we're being talked down to. So, yeah, I like it. Yeah,
so absolutely. So, what would have happened if the evil plan had actually worked? Oh, wait! That's actually happens.
Yep. For the third time running, this I'm kind of getting a little scared of the randomizer here, because for the third time running, it has taken us to a Doctor Who episode where the evil plan either actually works, or we see it working briefly in an alternate version of time.
Yeah.
So
we don't have to we don't have to conjecture. I guess you could argue, had it happened in our Earth, what sort of differences would have been? Could the Doctor have worked harder for it to reverse it? I don't know. There is an interesting side note. Again, this is getting into arguably non-canonical parts of the Doctor Who universe, but apparently in the novels, some of the leadership of fascist Earth survives, and they end up going to a base on the moon and becoming sort of an evil force for some other sort of story that happens, which is kind of an interesting development.
Obviously in this side universe, that the moon is not an egg.
Well, even if it is, you could still build a base on an egg. Good times.
Oh boy, Kill the Moon. One of my least favorite Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
So obviously we love this. Did we love it? Is it our favorite Doctor Who episode that we've rewatched so far?
I'll tell you this, it is for me, and it's close. I mean, I did love Dark Water, Death in Heaven, but Inferno edges it out. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed revisiting Inferno. I watched it over 3 nights. It's 7 episodes, and I think 2 chunks of 3, 1 chunk of 2. And every time I kind of wanted to keep watching. I was getting tired and I had to go to bed, but I was like, oh wow, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow night, where I can just just watch this adventure some more. I didn't want it to end.
Yeah.
Didn't feel like 7 episodes.
Yeah.
I know it's easy for old Doctor Who to go like, oh, it's plotting, and there's certainly arguably chunks of this episode you could do without, but it didn't feel long to me. I loved every minute of it.
It does. It sticks with you in an interesting way, and I think a way the Pyramids of Mars didn't. And I don't think it deserves its lowish spot on the official Doctor Who magazine rankings. I think it's number 18, whereas Pyramids
Respectable.
of Mars is number 8. It's respectable, but I think it deserves to be above Pyramids of Mars. Interestingly, I mentioned last week that Pyramids of Mars is sliding down the rankings as as Doctor Who magazine does more polls of the entire history of Doctor Who stories. Inferno is doing the opposite. It's going up.
Well, I support
So-
those developments. Yeah, I definitely would put this at number one of the ones we've talked about so far. I would definitely say it's in my top 10, probably my top 5. Yeah, Inferno, like in our Dalek Ogron
2 thumbs up.
rating system. I would. It's the Emperor Dalek right now.
$2 up, way up. Loved it. Yeah. So thanks, randomizer. Also interesting that we talked about this last week. At the beginning of Pyramids of Mars, the Doctor's like, I don't want to work for UNIT anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm going to run away. I'm the Brigadier's sidekick. I'm just going to run away from all that. And here he is 5 years earlier doing exactly the same thing, trying to run away from the Brigadier, insulting the Brigadier to his face at the very end,
right.
And then running away. So it's the Doctor and the Brigadier, it's kind of almost a Brokeback Mountain, I can't quit you situation.
Absolutely.
He's like, just keeps coming
I gotta
back.
say, in terms of the Doctor Brigadier conflicts, this is like pretty trivial. Like it's more of a funny moment that's kind of manufactured at the end by the Brigadier being very unsympathetic with what he's just gone through.
Yeah.
But it's really just played for laughs, and rightly so. Whereas I feel like, and maybe hopefully we'll get to it at some point, like the problem they had 2 episodes previous at the end of Doctor Who and the Silurians would have been much more of a substantive problem. And you kind of wonder, honestly, why the Doctor didn't just ditch the Brigadier and UNIT after that story, because they essentially just blow up the Silurians, even though the Doctor has already expressed, they're clearly intelligent. They're clear, they clearly have great technology, and they're the last of their people. And it's you really like. We'll get to it when we get to it. But I mean, you're stunned that now you because he said something mean to you, you're leaving, like, and him destroyed an entire committing genocide 2 episodes previous. That's okay. Like what? Yeah.
Yeah, discontinuity is the lifeblood of Doctor Who.
Indeed.
Oh, boy. Well, maybe that is where the randomizer will send us next.
Fingers crossed.
Shall we
More
get to it?
7-episoders. All right, do you have the technology? Do you have the randomizer ready? I have our reference material ready. By the way, we might want to recap what we're doing here. Every time we close our commentary of an episode, we pick the next episode we're going to go to, and as we said at the beginning, we're determined to do this in random order, and we have some wonderful technology that will pick a random number between 1 and 298, which is, by our reckoning, the number of stories, individual stories. Actually, 297. 297, right?
Yeah, it's 298 in the spreadsheet because An Unearthly Child is number 2.
Right, yeah. So we have 297
just,
stories. Chris, what is the wonderful technology we use to determine random numbers?
We use random.org, who, if they would like to sponsor the show, would certainly welcome it. They do lottery drawings, various other all your randomness needs comes from random.org, and they what I love is that they base it on atmospheric noise, which is the most doctorish way to get a random number online. Otherwise, it's just like an algorithm guessing at a random number, which isn't, the Doctor wouldn't stand for that. So we use proper randomness.
Nice.
And I'm excited. I'm ready to hit generate.
All right.
And here's where we insert the TARDIS noise or the Geronimo noise. You've got the list of the episodes.
I'll surprise you this week.
I'm going to hit generate. I look forward to it. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Hello, Z.
274.
Oh my, we're getting late. 274. The Pyramid at the End of the World and The Lie of the Land, a two-parter.
Oh boy! Oh, I was not a fan of those.
Well, we'll see. Now that we've had the original pyramids, now that we've covered those, we're coming back, and then maybe this is the logic of the randomizer. It wants us to knock off all the pyramid episodes early.
Pyramids that are definitely on Earth. The randomizer loves Capaldi.
It does. That's true.
I think we're starting to see that.
This is the latest of Capaldi episodes. This is late Capaldi. This is Capaldi and Bill, the Doctor and Bill and Nardole.
Yeah, and a fake regeneration, which is but we'll get into that next week. And
right.
Thank you, Pete, for another excellent discussion.
Thank you, Chris. This has been really, really fun revisiting Inferno, and it was really, like I say, it was nice to live vicariously through you on seeing it the first time, but having not seen it in something like 30 years, it felt really good.
Yep, we're not going to match up to next week.
Might take us a while to get a banger like that again.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's been great.
But we're doing all of Doctor Who in random order, so we got to take the rough with the smooth.
And thank you everyone for going on this journey with us. Thank you for listening. And again, we are a podcast. We're called Pull to Open. We're wherever you find your podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. We're on Google. We're on it all. Please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. Leave a review. Yes, we are on the TikToks. We're on TikTok at Pull to Open. Once again, we're having lots of fun there with excerpts from the show. Why don't you go ahead and drop us a line either there or on any of the socials, and let us know what you think. If you want us to do any TikTok in particular, let us know, and we will talk to you again next week.
All right, take it easy.
Bye-bye.